This is my Mexican Opal rough that I currently have, and I'm going to cut a couple of pieces. Ranges from kind of very red to a more of an orange red. I try to get red as possible and clean, and of course not sleepy. A lot of Mexican Opal is what's termed sleepy, and it's hard to describe, but when you look at it, you can see it. It won't cut a bright, brilliant stone. So this is a wonderful stone. It's not red, and I want to cut something smaller, 6, 7, 8 millimeters. So maybe there, maybe these. So I'll pick a couple of stones here and evaluate them and pick a couple to cut for our Mexican Opal project. Well, I couldn't pick one I liked a lot, and I have a lot of it. Well, not really a lot. I looked through handfuls of Mexican Opal to find the inventory that I have. Most of it, again, is too sleepy to use, or it's not red enough for what I want. So, although it looks like I have a lot of rough, I really don't. But I decided on these 3 pieces. So let me get them. I'll get my lap and probably the 600, probably the 12M, and grind a flat spot that I'll attach the dop to and kind of clean them up a little bit, preform them a little bit, get rid of this excess here that I'm not going to use, and kind of preform them a little bit with the lap, and then get them on the dop, and we'll see. I love cutting Mexican Fire Opal, but I haven't made a video of cutting it for a long time. The last video was using Ernie Haas's design, and here's the link to that video. In that video, I explain all about Mexican Fire Opals, so I won't recover a lot of the information here. Go ahead and take a look at that video. Now, as far as a design, a great place to find designs is with your local gem cutting club. For example, I found this design in one of the 2020 newsletters that the Victorian Fasteners group from Australia sends out. It's a quarterly newsletter called Meat Point, and it always has a lot of great fastening information, as well as several gem cutting designs. The design I will use today is called Modified Swiss by Douglas Hoffman, and I think this will be an interesting design to cut with my Mexican Fire Opals. The website for the Victorian Fasteners group is https://victorianfastenersgroup, all one word, .com, and they also have a Facebook page called, of course, the Victorian Fasteners group. Look them up. They're an awesome group of cutters, and they have cool accents. When I finish cutting the Modified Swiss, my Mexican Opal should look like this from the top, the side, and the bottom. Okay, for my Mexican Opals, for our Modified Swiss design, I'll start with the smallest and work my way up, hopefully learning a couple efficiencies and lessons learned along the way, so that if I make any mistakes, it'll be with the smaller one, hopefully. See how that works out. Okay, for our first Mexican Opal, I finished cutting and polishing the lower half of the stone, or the pavilion. And the nature of Mexican Opal is that it's just oddly shaped rough. I mean, it's like Mother Nature splattered the Mexican Opal rough all over the place to make it into its form. So it's always got strange, odd shapes, and in this case, it had a crater about there, and the only way to get rid of the crater was to make the stones smaller and to bring the pavilion down. So, and then I had to make the stone a little bit smaller so there's enough space left to cut the crown, or the upper half of the stone. So the stone would have been a millimeter or 2 bigger. It's going to be, right now it's about 5.3 millimeters. But that's the nature of Mexican Opal. You're always having to make the decision of leave in an inclusion or fracture or crater, or cut it out and make the stone a little bit smaller. So internally, there's nothing that I've seen in this stone. It's clean, it's internally clean. So it's going to be about 5.3 millimeters. So now I'll work on the second Mexican opal. Okay, so I'm still getting used to my new transfer fixture, transfer jig from Bill Compliment up in the Buckeye State. He made these, so we're going to use it to glue the first Mexican opal from the transfer from the crown, from the pavilion to the crown. So it just slides open and close, but you've got to be kind of gentle. I don't want to slam it closed. And it's got enough tension that it will hold with the gap, so that I can put the super glue, and I'm using the Loctite 404, into the dop, and then put the dops together and cure them that way. Okay. Then I just, you have to move the transfer jig around a little bit to make sure that the whatever adhesive you're using, glue or super glue or two-part epoxy, that it adheres to both, you know, the dop and the stone, doesn't run down the dop or down the side of the stone. It's not a problem if you're using wax, but wax takes a little bit of skill, and I'm just not there with wax. Okay, finished polishing the second Mexican opal with cerium oxide on a tin lap, and I lowered the RPMs on the Ultratech for this opal as I've been cutting opal. So I polish it generally around the 5 mark, which I guess is about 500 RPMs, which I've been doing with all the opals because they cut and polish so easily. So I just slow things down and don't overcut. Now I'll transfer this stone and cut the third one, and then we'll start cutting the crown or upper half of the 3 stones. Okay, I'm working on our third Mexican opal using the 12M lap, and this is where we're at. So we've got to close out this little kite-like crater, or you know, hole in the stone. Again, Mexican opal is comes such oddly shaped because it's like it gets just kind of thrown in a liquid form onto, you know, rocks, and then it hardens. So it's got all weird shapes, you know, with like wormholes in it. So it's always hard to, you know, get it cleaned up. So the issue is I can bring the pavilion down and to this point and get rid of this kite and have just maybe barely enough rough left here to cut the upper half of the stone to the crown. Or I could cut the girdle facets a little bit more, which would also get rid of this kite, but that makes the stone smaller. So I'm right at the edge of I can almost cut the pavilion down to here and have just barely enough. And I may have to cut the girdle in a little bit. So that's what I want to do. Is I want to save the size of the stone. I want the stone to be as big as possible. It's already clean inside, so we want the stone as big as possible. And so I don't want to cut the girdle any smaller if I don't have to. So we'll bring the pavilion down and then measure it again. Again, the measurement you're looking for is your crown to width ratio from the instruction, or the C to W, which in this stone, this design is 0.218. So you take your width, you measure the width of the stone, multiply it by 0.218, and that's how much you need, that's how many millimeters you need for the crown. Plus, don't forget, you need an amount for the girdle. So you just have to measure that, and as the stone gets smaller, of course, you have to remeasure it and check your calculation. I personally love cutting Mexican opal. It's really, to me, a joy to cut and polish, but there are some things you need to know about Mexican opal. For example, as I started the final cut here, this facet will come all the way down here. This will be the final row. So when I cut the first facet here, we had kind of a landslide on the other side of our Mexican opal, and a big chunk chipped out. This is unfortunately not too uncommon with Mexican opal. It chips, so you've got to use your finer laps. That's why you don't want to start out with any rough laps with your Mexican opal. And it happens. This won't cause me any major concern. I'll be able to clean that up. But you never want to lose control of your quill or drop your quill or onto the lap with Mexican opal or any or push down too hard or anything. You got to watch for that. But just be aware that's part of the nature of working with Mexican opal. But it's still, for me, a great stone to work with. Okay, I use a 20 power loop. The industry standard, the jewelry industry, is a 10 power loop, 10 times magnification. That's what every jewelry store uses, every jeweler uses. When you go buy a diamond ring and look at through a loop, it's a 10 power, 10 time magnification loop that you're using. I started with a 20 power loop. I've always used a 20 power loop. I'm comfortable using it and it works for me. So, and let me show you the basic difference. So on this facet, you can see that on the girdle, it's slightly cut higher, than this facet, and this facet means we need to cut it down a little bit. You can see that in the 10 power and the 20 power loop. You see these kind of diagonal scratches along here. When the light hits it just right there, you can see them. Okay, so right here at the bottom, where this facet, this last facet does not yet touch the girdle, there's a gap, and you can see with the 10 power loop one diagonal scratch. So with a 20 power loop, I see 3 diagonal scratches going up to this very small, the highest one goes up to where the bottom point of this facet touches, and then there's a line. So the third one goes up there. There's 2 other ones. So for me, I see 3 scratches, which I'll clean up. If somebody were to look at it through a 10 power loop, they would only see the 1 scratch. So if somehow I miss something and leave 1 little scratch with my 20 times magnification loop, you won't see it with a 10 power loop. That's the difference. So is it harder to use a 20 power loop than a 10 power loop? Nope. Is it difficult? No. But it's what you train on. BOPIE uses a 10 power loop. She's a jeweler. She's in the jewelry store. When sometimes she comes and looks at something I'm cutting and grabs my loop, she's not comfortable with it. It's not what she's trained with. So you can't really go out and get a 10 power loop, a 20 power loop, a 30 power loop, and evaluate them if you've spent your whole career working with a 10 power loop. Your evaluation is going to be that the 10 power loop is the best. So what I would recommend, 10 power loop, that's what the industry uses, that's what all the jewelers uses, that's the standard for the industry, that's what you should use for faceting. I went with the 20 power loop because I wanted to make sure close. No cuts are perfect, but trying to get closer. So for me, just to push myself a little further, I got the 20 power loop, and that's what I use. But it's up to you. Okay, I've finished polishing our third Mexican opal, the pavilion or bottom half of the stone. So now I'll transfer this stone and we'll start cutting the upper half of these 3 stones, or the crown. Okay, my 3 Mexican opals are all in the transfer jigs and the glue has dried. I'm ready to use heat cautiously to remove one of the dops on each of these and start working on the upper half of the stone. These two transfer jigs came from Ultratech when I got my B2, and then later when I got my B5. They're not exactly the same, as you can see. This one's has a little wider opening than this one. And this is my latest transfer jig. It was made by Bill Companion up in the Buckeye State, and it has an added feature here where you can put two dops in and a little brass sleeve that he made and verify, make sure that the dops are perfectly calibrated. So he's on Facebook, give him a shout if you're interested. So I'm ready to finish the transfer and start cutting the upper half of these stones. Finished polishing the crown of our first Mexican opal with cerium oxide on a tin lap, and I'll put it aside and cut the other two before taking on the tables of all three of them at the same time. So this is the largest piece of our Mexican opal, and I've just finished polishing the upper half, the crown, and what's left to do is the table. So I'll remove this from the dop and finish our third Mexican opal, cutting and polishing the upper half, and then I'll cut all three tables of all the stones, one after the other. Okay, I've finished cutting and polishing the upper half of all three of our Mexican opals, and now I'll cut the tables. So I've set the angle for the Ultratech at 45 degrees, and with the tabling adapter in place and the table aligner, I've tightened that down. So now we just put the dops in and they'll be set up to cut the tables. I've finished cutting and polishing our three Mexican opals, so I'll soak them in acetone and to get the super glue off of the dops, and then we'll weigh them, measure them, and send them to BOPIE'S.
The modified Swiss is not a difficult design. In my opinion, any cutter would enjoy this design, and it is very suitable for a new cutter. Mexican Fire Opal cuts and polishes beautifully. It is my favorite material to cut. You do have to take it easy. It is brittle, it can chip, so don't use rough grits. And I lower the lap speed on my laps because this material basically cuts like butter. So let me know what you think of the gemstones in the comments, and happy fastening, everyone.